It's not uncommon for sons and daughters to resent their dads. It's not uncommon. There may be some here this morning. My task is not to judge you at all. My task is to, in fact, address all future parents as well as existing parents to talk about the one thing that Paul addresses to fathers. Of all the subjects that he could have addressed to dads, he chose one thing. Why? There's a number of reasons, but what I want to get across this morning from Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, and I'll begin reading verse 1, is that fathers especially are to guard against provoking their daughters and their sons to resentment. Let's read the text, but read the context, because the context helps us to understand our verse for the morning. Children, chapter 6, verse 1 of Ephesians, children, they're your parents. And some translations add, in the Lord. And then he gives a reason why they ought to obey their parents. Because this is right. He doesn't say because they're perfect, or they're the best parents in the world. That may not be the case. But it's just, it's right. Dikaion, the word that comes from the legal world. This is the right thing to do. Then he goes on and adds a further explanation. Honor your father and your mother. By the way, honor, that's the word from which Gina's little grandson's name comes from, Timothy. Timothy means to honor God. Here, honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. What does that mean? It's the first commandment in the Ten Commandments that is accompanied by a promise. And so he quotes the promise. What is it? He says, well, if you honor your father and mother, here's what's going to happen. It will be well with you, and you will live long on the earth. Yes, you will enjoy a long life on the earth if you honor your parents. Then, verse 4, and he says, and fathers. And fathers. Now, why didn't he say mothers? Well, in a sense, he does. For example, anytime Paul writes 2 epistles, he always uses what word? Brothers. Does that mean that he's only writing to the men in the congregation and that all the women are exempt from whatever he has to say? No. No, when he writes brothers, he includes sisters. So when he writes fathers, who does he include? Mothers. But primarily, the danger for driving kids and exasperating kids and goading them to be resentful, it's usually fathers. It's usually dads. He says, do not provoke your children. Provoke them to anger. Exasperate them to anger. And then in the second half of the verse is the antidote to not provoking our children to anger. We'll deal with that, Lord willing, next Sunday morning. A couple of things that we need to explain here in this verse. First of all, by way of context, if children are obligated to obey their parents, then parents ought to deserve that obedience. And parents can deserve that obedience by this command. It just seems so unfair for a child to have to obey his or her parents if the parents are disobeying God. It's a hypocritical stance. And it creates a system of injustice inside the child's heart. Parents need to behave in such a way that the obedience of the children is well deserved. The second thing we need to understand about this is the context. The book of Ephesians is written in the first century. It's written to a church of both Jews and Gentiles, but it's during the period of the Roman Empire. A father had complete authority over his children. For example, what was often the case, if a father was looking for a boy, and instead his wife gave birth to a girl, he had a legal right to take the little baby girl and just lay her out on the hillside and be exposed and be eaten up by wild hogs or wild dogs. And that happened millions of times over and over and over. And the father would not be held liable. Secondly, he could sell his kids if he was hard up for money. He could sell them into slavery. There would be no court, there would be no adjudication. He could just sell his kids. Or he could, if he wanted to, if things were that serious, he could actually have them put to death. So a father's authority in the Roman Empire was 100%. He could do anything he wanted. It's in that context that this command comes, fathers, don't goad your children, provoke them to resentment. So Christian dads are to be countercultural. Christian dads cannot float with the flotsam of the culture and be like Roman fathers. They need to be different. And can I say it today? Christian fathers need to be different today in 1,000 different ways. So the culture demanded a change of lifestyle and demanded a change in the way that they treated their children. Now, what does it mean to provoke to resentment? We've talked about the context, we've talked about fathers and the culture of fathers. What does it mean to provoke to resentment? Well, the New Testament uses two words, normally, to talk about anger. And when you read your English Bible, it's hard to know the difference between the two. But in the Greek text, they're very different. The first word, which is not the word Paul uses here, is the word translated wrath. And we don't use that word a whole lot in our conversations. I mean, really, when's the last time you heard someone talking about wrath? Other than if they were reading a Bible verse. The wrath of God. Wrath is an explosive temper. Wrath is the kind of anger that I could use, or the analogy I would use would be like taking a match and throwing it into a pile of dry straw. What happens? But then as soon as the straw is burned, what happens to the anger? It comes down. So it's quick, and then it's gone. So a person who has a short fuse, a short temper, gets angry easily, could be the talk of the town and the life of the party in 10 minutes. He could act like nothing ever happened. Meanwhile, he ignores all the damage that he did with his explosive temper. But this is not the anger that Paul is driving at here. The word that Paul is using here is orge, and when you combine a prefix to the word, it means to provoke or to incite someone to orge. What is orge? Orge is internal. It's not a kind of a mad, shut up, cursing, swearing, throwing things. No, it's the word in our language, resentment. It's that internal feeling, in this case, the child, that he is being mistreated and treated unjustly and not according to his age and his abilities over a period of time. It's resentment. It's a grudge. It's animosity. It's quiet. And even though he may not throw things and pound on the table, it bleeds. It's internal and it bleeds out. It bleeds out of his face and it bleeds out of his words. You can usually tell a person who is resentful by their face. You can usually tell what's happening inside the home by looking at a child's face. Because they wear it on the inside, but it bleeds out on the outside. It's like a chain. Every time there's some sense of injustice against him or against her, that one link connects to the prior one, connects to the prior one, connects to the prior one. So eventually it looks like this daughter or this son is carrying this chain. It's a series of resentments that goes back many, many, many years. No one resents someone for one thing. They don't, do they? What they do is they resent a series of injustices and mistreatments over a period of time. This is what Paul is addressing. This is why Paul says, dads, don't provoke your sons and your daughters to resentment. And so in this context, the child is too young to have the skills to know what to do. The child is not at fault. Now, if you have a male who's an adult or a female who's an adult, and they're filled with resentment, they have no excuse. They have the skills and the know-how how to deal with resentments, but a child doesn't. And how does that happen? In many cases, the dad has authority, he has power, he's intelligent, and what does he do? He expects children to behave in ways that are unnatural to them, not age appropriate. He expects them to achieve straight A's when they might be a C student. But because of his desires and his viewpoints, he takes out that anger and that beratement on his children. And after a while, the child feels like, I never can please my dad. Anything I do, it's never quite good enough. He'll always pick at me, always criticize me. If I get a B+, why couldn't you get an A? Very common in our culture, in our achievement-oriented culture, isn't it? For kids to feel like they'll never make it. And slowly, slowly, that resentment grows.